educator or a former professor on some of these things, was teaching classes on this. You're very serious about these issues too, and yet you don't see eye to eye with some of these issues. You're both people I take seriously, though. What do you fault Gary Gensler on when it comes to some of these things?
Yeah, so if you listen to the exchange that I had with Chairman Gensler yesterday, a big part of it was the fact that the SEC has not laid out clear guidelines on what kinds of cryptocurrencies they view as securities, right? Their regulatory regime is limited to securities and platforms that trade securities. Well, if cryptocurrencies, or at least certain cryptocurrencies, are not securities, then the SEC doesn't currently have legislative authority to regulate them. Now, maybe you can make a case that we ought to change that. We can have that conversation. But here's what concerns me. Chairman Gensler will acknowledge that, say, Bitcoin and Ethereum certainly are not securities. Certainly they look more like commodities. He'll acknowledge that. But then he'll say that stablecoins pretty much are securities. But if you ask me, they don't actually meet the test, the legal test for what constitutes a security. So I'm just asking the SEC to provide some clarity. Let us know. Why do you think this is a security? What are the characteristics of a cryptocurrency that make it a security, so that people will know, and then let the laws, enforce the laws. Maybe we need to make some changes. I'm not in the camp that thinks that there should never be any kind of regulation over any cryptocurrency. That's not my position at all. But I do think there needs to be transparency and objectivity about what we're doing here. And the SEC is taking enforcement actions without first having laid out how they interpret, how they apply existing securities law to this really, really important an innovative new category of finance.
Innovative it is, and it's been hard for the regulators to keep up. You understand that, it often is hard for regulators to keep up with the pace of innovation. He makes a point in saying it's the wild, wild west out there. I mean, we saw earlier this week the Litecoin situation, that fake release that went out and said that Walmart was going to start accepting it. And it does make you look at this and say, hey, maybe there is some regulatory oversight that's needed, and maybe it'll take a little too long. I can kind of see him laying down his place markers as a way to get to just a signal that, hey, there's something coming, so you better sit up and pay a little more attention.
Yeah, look, I think it is a little bit of the Wild West, and there's no doubt some of these projects are going to end badly. There's some of these projects are offering returns that don't make sense to me. It's hard for me to imagine how they are sustainable. All of that, I think, is true. But I think it's also the case that the SEC owes Americans generally, and certainly everybody in this space, the transparency of saying, here's how we're looking at this. Here's why we think this category is a security, and we're going to regulate it as such. These are not securities, and they have to either be unregulated or regulated somewhere else. The cash market for commodities are not federally regulated. CFTC regulates futures. The SEC regulates securities. Of course, we have multiple bank regulators. But, we've got to sort this out, and we ought to have transparency before we go with enforcement.
Let me ask you about one issue that came out. Let me change it around and do it this way. What do you agree with Gary Gensler on? Are there areas where you say, okay, he's right on this?
I think there are certainly products that are being offered that look an awful lot like securities or mutual funds or money market accounts, and there ought to be comparable regulatory regimes over comparable products. I think Gary Gensler and I would agree with that. We agree that some of the most popular cryptocurrencies in the world are certainly not securities. Bitcoin is not a security. Ethereum is not a security. Gary Gensler agrees with that. So there's actually considerable overlap. I think we got a little bit of a struggle on what he considers to be securities.